Excellent. Let's see if this works. Oh, wait. There we go. What's up, everybody? My name is Luke Stokes. I work with a number of different projects in the EOS space, including EOS DAC, which is a block producer, and also FIO, which I talked about yesterday, which is Foundation for Inter-Wallet Operability. It's an EOS IO fork. But this talk is going to be about, does EOS need a foundation? And if so, what might it look like? If you were here earlier, Brock was talking a bit about this in the Meet the Blockers fireside chat and that kind of stuff. And so we're just going to continue that conversation. We're going to talk about what would it look like if EOS had a foundation and what might it do. So first we're going to say, does EOS need a foundation? What could it do? And if it does have a foundation, who's in charge? So I should probably back up a little bit. When I first was approached, so I've been part of EOS since before the mainnet launch, and when I was first approached about an idea, something like this, I was like, of course not. That's silly. We don't want centralized anything. It's DPoS, it's delegated proof of stake. The block producer is going to figure everything out, and it's going to be fine. Because I was thinking either it's going to be powerless, so what's the point, or it's going to have power, which obviously is not the point. We don't want a centralized organization having any kind of power. We're trying to build distributed, decentralized systems. But what got me interested about being involved in this in particular, and it kind of felt the same with the EOS Alliance, but with this, we're building a DAO. And as I said, I've been working with EOS DAC for a long time. Decentralized autonomous communities, decentralized autonomous organizations actually create a space and a structure for holding what some might call power or influence, or just providing a central point of communication that is not controlled by any one individual. There's no single point of failure. And that was really exciting to me to think, hey, this might work. I moved to Puerto Rico, Brock's in Puerto Rico as well, so you can kind of put two and two together. He contacted me to get involved in this, and we've been working on it. So when we look at some of the other chains in the space, Tezos Foundation, $30+ million they're spending. Ethereum Foundation, $30 million. Cardano Foundation has $62 million. So there's a ton of money being spent in these other chains to support the chain. Now, as we talked about earlier, Blockone can't really do that for legal reasons. So we don't have a way to represent our distributed, decentralized community in EOS mainnet. So this is a problem. And it's funny because lots of people who don't know much about EOS might say, oh, it's a centralized coin or this, that, and the other. But it's actually so decentralized in lots of ways we can't get things done. And as Brock mentioned earlier, if you're a media outlet or something like that, who do you go to if you want to talk to EOS? Where does the media go to? Where does a conference go to if they need a speaker? Other than Dan Larimer, they can go to Blockone for sure. But if they want to talk to like Igor or some of these incredible technical people, or Jay, some of the amazing people in our community, how do they get a hold of these different people? How do they even know who they are? What would a speakers bureau look like, for example? And then who provides clarity between the block producers and Blockone and EOS mainnet and EOS versus EOS IO? And these are very complicated things that even within our own community we get confused. And so it's really, really confusing for people outside of our community. And how we go about dealing with EOS specific concerns. So for example, Michael Yates has a pull request that's been sitting there for a long time to change the scheduling algorithm. The block producers, the way they're scheduled right now is alphabetic. And it's not at all efficient. So you might have to go to China for one block producer and then over here and then back over here. And it's supposed to be done geographically around the globe. We have a solution for that, but it hasn't been rolled out yet. It's just not a high priority for the Blockone developers at this point. So what would it look like for us to have a place to talk about our own specific to EOS mainnet concerns in the code? And where can we come together to define what the future vision of mainnet is? EOS IO is a technology, but EOS is a running blockchain with a whole bunch of participants. What do we want EOS to be? Is it going to be a world computer? Is it going to be the best cryptocurrency and challenge Bitcoin? What's it going to look like? We all get to decide that, but if we're so decentralized we can't even have the conversation together, how are we going to figure that out? So this is the current mission statement. It's a draft, and this, again, we're just having a conversation. We've been working on some of this stuff, but it's all up to what we decide as a community. So the current draft is the EOS Foundation is a nonprofit built into the blockchain itself that serves the EOS community through facilitating code, capital, and communication, and by acting as an advocate for EOS to the outside world. So I was just in Rio last week, and we had a great community conference there, and some of these changes, like that, you heard Brock earlier say connections. Well, we talked to the community, and we're like, no, we want communication. That's a little more clear, a little more specific. Connections can be, not really sure what that is. So we're making these changes based on feedback from the community. We've got a Telegram group and other people that are participating, and I'm inviting you all as well to participate in this conversation. So what could it do? It could do onboarding for new users, onboarding for new developers, onboarding for enterprises, and again, that communication part. And this is really important right now because, for example, let's say you're a big company and you want to work with EOS mainnet. Where do you go? You might think, well, I'll go to my local block producer. And then they have to go through the whole conversation saying, well, we're not EOS. We're just, as Rob was saying earlier on the panel, we're just a brick in the whole building. And then they have to explain all that, and it's confusing. Or they might go to Block 1, and Block 1's like, hands off. We can't touch EOS mainnet because SEC and concerns legally and all that kind of stuff. So just being able to clarify where people can go to have these conversations and figure things out is really important. And to actually sell the benefits specifically of EOS mainnet, not necessarily EOS IO, the technology stack, if you want to do a private chain or anything like that. So right now we don't have a way to do this. So there are a lot of different example projects as well. And we'll get to how these might be funded, but you can have, like I said, a speakers bureau, or you could have developer resources specific to EOS mainnet. You could have a legal defense fund. It's kind of an interesting idea. A lot of the block producers are putting themselves out there in certain cases by producing blocks on the blockchain. And if any country decides to say, hey, we're going to come after you because you're doing something we don't like, well, who are they going to turn to? Who's going to protect them? Who's going to fight that battle for them? Maybe that would be a role the foundation could serve. And again, communications and conferences. We had a community conference in Rio, which was fantastic. And so what are we going to do next year? Where are we going to go next? And who could fund that ongoing conference within our own community specific to EOS mainnet? These are some of the things, again, that I think the foundation could do. And they're kind of getting done by the community in kind of haphazard ways. I think EOS Rio did an amazing job at the conference. They did an incredible job, and they worked really hard for that. And I was really blessed to be able to go to that. But it's a challenging thing to put on a conference. And the resources to do a bigger one. If EOS continues to grow, as a lot of us believe it will, those conferences are going to get really big. Who's going to be responsible for that? These are things that we could think about. So one of the things that we want to focus on is just like, okay, yes, we're just having a conversation, we're just putting ideas out there, but there has to be enough structure to at least conceptualize the idea. So we have got a group of people that have been working for a few months now, quite a bit actually, some from the EOS Alliance Board and some others in the community to kind of figure out, okay, what can we start with? So we've been talking about starting with code, capital, and communication. We think those are kind of basic ideas that people can understand. So for code, for example, would be a GitHub repo managed by the community, not by Block1 necessarily. And that way, again, we could control which pull requests we prioritize within our community. Capital might take a bunch of different forms. Capital might be specifically just to fund the foundation as a nonprofit, organizing together to make sure that the things that it serves the community on can be sustainable. Or it might extend further than that. It might actually fund projects within the EOS mainnet, potentially. We don't know. We're just having the conversation. And then, of course, communication. When people were like, hey, I need somebody to show up at my conference, or I want to talk to EOS, it's like we just don't have a way to answer that right now. And this will hopefully help with that, make that a little more easy to understand. So how could it be funded? We could do donations, which I think is kind of leaning towards the way we're going to start, which is essentially, and it might start off small. You heard Brock say earlier, like $1 million or something would be kind of neat. And the idea being we have to prove ourselves. We have to prove ourselves to ourselves as a community that we're going to steward this money well, that we're going to use it for good purposes that add value to the community, and that we're going to demonstrate that we can handle more resources in the future. And then, of course, and this is maybe a little more contentious, another obvious option is through inflation. So if you're familiar with EOS at mainnet, it has initially 5% inflation designed to go to various things to fund the network. 1% goes to block producers currently. 4% was originally designed for worker proposal system or other mechanisms to fund the chain, and that's not really ever happened. The code launched prior to any of that being available, and it's kind of been sitting there. A while back, I think we burned, 30-something million tokens as a community that was agreed to, but that money is still accumulating there. That inflation still exists. Maybe someday it might be used to fund something like this. Again, we don't know. These are just conversations we're having. And then who makes the decisions? This is the important part, like I talked about earlier, that I'm really concerned about. Because if we do this wrong, it's just going to be bad. It's going to be another example for why people may not trust EOS, may not be excited about what EOS is doing. And so I personally am excited about a DAO style. And a DAO style, I'll get into the mechanics of how that might look, but essentially it just decentralizes the governance, the decision-making process according to the stakeholders, the people that have added value in the EOS network. And then, of course, you could also just do standard DPoS. So basically, if you're a block producer, there's some interesting models that Dash uses and others where the master nodes kind of make decisions for their funding of projects and their foundation, things like that. It's another possibility we could look at. So again, who's in charge? Very important. So when we talk about a decentralized, autonomous organization, these are just initial ideas. One of the ideas we had, which I really kind of like, and we've actually coded this up, and it's sitting on the testnet right now. And we're playing around with what this might look like, is the concept of a value receipt distribution. So this is a non-transferable token, but it's not really a token. So if you donate, and we have the smart contract written already, if you donate, you'll get this DAO token distributed to your account. But it's not really a token, it's really a value receipt. It can't be transferred. It doesn't really have any monetary value, so we're hopefully not going to deal with any kind of SEC concerns or anything like that. It's just a mechanism to say, hey, this account contributed value to the foundation, and therefore it has some decision in who's going to be elected as a steward. It has some decision making as far as where things are going to go with the foundation. And another part about that too, instead of it just being whoever donates the most amount of money, an idea we're throwing around is, what if we go through the whole project set of all the things that have happened before mainnet launched till now? All the block producers, all the apps, all the wallets, all the exchanges, all the people that have made this thing worthwhile. Some of them got paid, sure, with block production rewards or other things, and some of them didn't. Some of them worked really hard and got nothing. And it's just the idea being, what if we did this at launch of this foundation, this distribution to a whole bunch of people? And just said, hey, here's a non-transferable token on your account. We just want to acknowledge that you added value. Like, what if we just gave tokens to Scatter, gave tokens to EOS Voter, like these tools that were super critical, especially in the early days, and say, we want your voice to be heard in the foundation. We want you to be represented because we as a community recognize that you added value. So this is one of the ideas we're thinking about. Again, I already mentioned donations, which is going to be really important. And with this too, I should probably, I'm going to check real quick to see if I have, yeah, okay. I don't have another slide, so I'm going to go a little more detail on the value receipt distributions. One of the other interesting ideas that's already been coded in our testnet example is that these tokens, the weight of your vote, so essentially these tokens are governance tokens for voting in stewards who then are actually on a multisig for the DAO. So they would control the funds of the DAO. If they want to spend funds on the DAO, it would be a 15 of 21. If it's, in this case, or actually we're setting at start, it will probably be about 7 stewards, growing to 12 stewards. And again, these are all numbers that we're playing around with. But that multisig would actually be in control of the funds. And the people that would be elected to that multisig would be based on the voting of those with the most amount of value receipt distributions. But the cool thing about that is the weight of each of those votes would decay over time. And we're thinking maybe 6-month voting terms, maybe 3-month voting terms, still playing around with some of these numbers. But the idea being, let's say the term is 6 months. 6 months later, your vote weight is half of what it was today. And the point of that being, there's always going to be this incentive to get new donations, new value creation, new participants, and new people saying, hey, I can stand up and provide more value. Elect me. You know, have this kind of round of rocking the vote, get people out there, get excited to participate. And it also means that the people who are adding value today have the most say compared to the people who added value, 6 months ago or a year ago. And it kind of creates this excitement around the voting, around the donations, about all that. And the beautiful thing about a DAC and a DAO, if you're not familiar with decentralized autonomous organization or decentralized autonomous community, essentially everything is on chain, completely transparent. And again, I worked in this community for a while with EOS DAC, with actual elected custodians managing funds. And we've had, some bad actors here and there try and participate. And this one thing, financial transparency on chain, is really beautiful because you see people participate and then they start, doing things that the community is not happy with and they just get voted out. And it's kind of a beautiful thing. It's like, hey, if you're not going to create value for the community, you're not going to be able to participate at that level. So I've seen it work myself. It's pretty exciting. And I'm excited for the potential for something like a foundation. Now, when I get opportunities to chat with Brock about some of this stuff, one of the neater ideas, this is kind of down the road a little bit more, is the idea that we could set an example, not only for EOS, but also, Brock is involved in Bitcoin Foundation, for example. There's the Ethereum Foundation, the other blockchain foundations that might look at this and say, wow, what a great model for governance. What if we use blockchains to manage our own foundations in transparent ways? And then if you go even further, we might even set the standard for what any nonprofit might consider and think, hey, this is a great way to do transparency, to make sure that the donors and the participants and everyone involved recognizes that we're using this money to benefit others, not just ourselves. And the stewards I talked about a little bit as well. They're just, custodians of the funds, stewards of the community. They have kind of this joint role to set the vision collectively, but at the same time, they would champion a project, most likely. So a steward might say, hey, I want to build, for example, a privacy layer on EOS. This is something that was talked about, a project potential that's there. So you could actually, enterprises come to EOS and put actual customer data on there, not super secure data, but some customer data, and put it in a privacy layer. that might encourage them to use EOS mainnet as opposed to EOS.io and make a private chain. That'd be a really cool project. And a steward could come along and say, hey, vote for me. I'm going to make sure that project happens. I'm going to get the connections together, get the groups together, and make it happen. So stewards play a really important role. And again, if you're interested in this, I highly encourage you to participate and get involved. If you feel you could play that role as a steward, we'd love to have you. Join the Telegram, join the conversation for code, capital, and communication on EOS. So this is the call to action. If you want to help, if you want to participate in this, that's my email address. That's my Telegram Twitter handle. I can actually just go ahead and add you here as well if you want. Come find me afterwards into the Telegram channel. There's about, I think, 40 or 50 of us now that are discussing what this EOS Foundation might look like. So I'd love to have you participate. I think this is a really amazing opportunity. I don't think there's anything else like this going on in the space where people are using the blockchain as the actual system for governance for what they're doing in a way that's like representing this kind of completely decentralized distributed systems. And again, I think it's what EOS needs. So with that, I think we have a good amount of time to kill before the next thing goes on. So if you guys don't mind, we could open up to questions. What do y'all think of this? You think it's a good idea? You think it's valuable? Do you have any questions? Yeah, go ahead. So the question was, why didn't Blockone do this? They got a lot of money, the VC fund and everything. I think that was the expectation on some level I know I'll just speak for myself. And as we saw with the SEC ruling that came out and what Brock talked about a little bit earlier, they literally couldn't. They just, for legal reasons, they could not get involved in EOS mainnet because that would demonstrate provably that it was a security, and they may have not gotten off for the amount they got off, which is a very, very small amount of money. So they were fined, they did settle, and it was a small amount of money, and now they're in the clear. And the reason they're in the clear, the reason some of them didn't get fined for much, much more money or even worse, is because they did not participate in EOS mainnet. Now, a lot of people think, well, hey, now they can. They can just, now that that's clear, we can just march along and do stuff. And it's not necessarily the case, because anything they do from that moment forward that is considered a security, for example, that would put them in hot water. So. I agree. Blockone could definitely donate money to the foundation and get it done, and I would like to see that happen. I hope it does. We'll see. I don't know. Yeah. Any other questions? Thank you. That was a great question. No, go ahead. That's a great question. This is why we're having this conversation. There's a great book called Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. It's a philosophy book. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of it, but it talks about the very difficult problem of defining quality. It's an extremely challenging philosophy concept. As soon as you think you understand it, it's kind of ethereal. Like, what is quality? What's value? It's very subjective. So we kind of have to come together as a community and give it our best shot. So for example, how many people here have EOS and have used Scatter, for example? Okay, a lot of people have used Scatter. It's created a bunch of value. So I think no one would complain if we said, hey, we should give Scatter a bunch of these. We want them to participate in this process. So I think if we come up with something like that. So I'll tell you where we are as of a couple days ago. So EOS Costa Rica has been doing a fantastic job to help with some of this. And we found, so I put together a spreadsheet of all the different blockchain projects I could find on EOS. And then I found, through the help of EOS Canon, a website that had actual, not only the data, but the EOS account names. So we kind of scraped all that data, and we threw it in the spreadsheet, and now we have a form, and we're basically going to call to action the entire community, come to this thing. We've already listed out every single thing that's ever been built on EOS, basically, with the EOS account name, and just edit it, make sure it's accurate, and then tell us what you think. Do you think this is a valuable thing? Come vote, basically. And then we're going to use that as a genesis group of stewards that are, yes, unelected, yes, it's subjective, and hopefully come up with a plan to say, well, when this thing launches, we're going to drop this many receipt value tokens to all these amazing projects. That's one idea. Another idea was to reward Genesis accounts from the snapshot. All those participants who helped EOS get here. Another would be to reward the BPs that launched it, or all the BPs, or all, we don't know. These are the things we have to figure out. It's a very hard problem, but I'm willing to try. Because I think it's a cool idea. It's not just going to be donations. It's also going to be a nod to the people that got us here, I think and there's also EOS Acknowledgements.io, I think it is. There's a website out there of all the people that have helped, get the mainnet launched. That would be another great source of information. Any other questions? And again, yeah, go ahead. As far as the foundation itself, yeah, that's an interesting question. It's like the value receipt, if that could be considered like a reputation layer. Yeah, it kind of does actually. I hadn't thought of it in that terms, but it's non-transferable, so it's attached to an account, and it is kind of like a badge of honor. It could even be called a badge potentially as well. Yeah, it is kind of a reputation marker of sorts, and that would then give someone the ability to say, hey, that person has a reputation. Let's go ahead and give them a voice. Kai. Yes, the current, again, this is all draft. So any of this can change tomorrow or today even. So we're just having the conversation to figure things out. We haven't finalized any of this. So the question was, are the tokens, and again, I like to call them value receipts because they're not really tokens. You can't transfer them, they're badges maybe. I don't know. Maybe if you can come up with a better name for them, we can change that again. Are they just used for voting? That's currently the thinking. There isn't really another thing you can do with a non-transferable token, much more than that. But we do need a mechanism to say, how are we as a community going to come together and decide who are those 7 stewards that are going to launch with this, and when donations of money come in, they're going to be responsible for managing that money and making good decisions on it. How do we come to a decision about that? Those other foundations I mentioned earlier, they thought about this in the beginning. A lot of them built that into their ICO. They built that into their token from launch. We don't have that opportunity because of all the Blockone stuff we talked about. So we have to come up with something different. Yeah. No, go ahead. Great questions. Potentially, yes. You could create a derivative on a non-transferable token and then go sell it to have more voting influence and voting weight. And these are definitely concerns we've thought through. And there's just the same way you could just donate a bunch of money and have a bunch of control as well. And so these are things we'll have to figure out. I don't think it'll be perfect, and that's another reason why I don't think we want to start with a massive amount of money, right? I want to start small actually and make sure that we can govern ourselves well and go from there. But if you have any suggestions, I'd love to talk more about it.
That's one thing I feel is that it's very much when I heard Sloan about the discussion of payments that I felt the effort has been geared towards how to make EOS makes money for people. Monetary incentive is the only thing that can make it. And how to make it objective for people to work on it is also very important, which means the only thing the foundation should major part is that how can we create value for people all the companies. And so if anything you do, whatever you propose here, you should generate a way you can measurable that actually creates value for the system. Let's just say you create a deal that generates certain amount of EOS values, right? Like adoption cost, it's like US dollar. One more country use EOS, and you start giving that people either pro rata kind of way for the vote they can do. Then they wouldn't sell it because what you want is create more value on the holding company, not your voters. Selling your vote will not generate anything other than how you sell it.
Yeah, these are the conversations we need to have because it's obviously with all the different directions we could go as mainnet. Are we a world computer? Are we an amazing cryptocurrency? Like, for example, there's not a website you can go to right now that just sells EOS as the best cryptocurrency on the planet. It might be. It's certainly a hedge against Bitcoin, which is a hedge against the fiat financial system, and there's not really anyone pitching that message. There's a great EOS Cash as a project that came out of Rio, and they're launching another chain that is basically going to do what it sounds like, do that. They're going to promote DeFi and things like that. So there might be disagreements on what the purpose and vision of EOS mainnet is long term. One thing we can all agree on is we want a high token price. That makes everybody happy, right? So how to accomplish that? is very, very challenging, and even creating expectations that we could accomplish that is also challenging. I've been involved in enough cryptocurrency projects to know, and I tweeted this the other day. I was like, cryptocurrency, the price of EOS I think on the 25th was like $2 and something cents. On the 26th, it was $3 and something cents. The only difference was Bitcoin went up. We didn't add a governance layer. We didn't submit, some new code change. We didn't add more dApps. Nothing changed. It was just Bitcoin went up. So those are interesting conversations to think about, because it's like, if we're still in the phase of being a hedge against Bitcoin, as Bitcoin goes up, we go up as well, which is being a hedge against US dollars or something like that. Maybe our focus should be on capturing more of that. Maybe we go up a little more than the guys next to us, every time Bitcoin goes up. Maybe someday we start a conversation to say, if you want digital cash or digital money online, maybe this is easier to use than Bitcoin. These are interesting conversations to have if you want to increase value. And there's no one having those conversations right now. Because really, obviously, Blockone can't say that, right? Pretty much no one can say, make those kind of promises, because then you get in security land. But maybe the foundation could at least create a space, like Brock was saying, a town hall location where people could have these conversations, like a convention center or something. But we still got to keep the lights on and pay the people involved in the convention center. And so this at least creates a model, even just for that, to make sure those people get funded to keep those conversations going. So any other questions? Yeah. For now, maybe just like Rob was saying, just find Rob, find me, find some people that are, got my info up there, that are involved. It's kind of, that's part of the conversation we're having too. Like when I was in Rio, I think I added like a dozen people, and I was kind of nervous to do it, because before it was kind of like these selected influencers, that are connected to exchanges, kind of like a who's who or whatever. And we open it up to, we want more feedback. But at the same time, I don't know if you've seen EOS Gov or some of these Telegram channels, they can get just noisy, and then there's not a lot of value, there's not a lot of signal. So it's a challenging question about how open do we have these conversations in this early time period, as we're still trying to figure out what we want to do without it just becoming noisy. So I think that's it. Do we have anything else scheduled? I think we're waiting for Wax Chain later, so we might be able to just sit and have more conversation if you want. Any other ideas or questions? Yeah, good question. If this is so challenging, why do I do it? I believe very passionately about DACs and DAOs, decentralized autonomous communities and decentralized autonomous organizations. I think these, if done well, could be, again, a new model for how nonprofits govern themselves, how humans govern themselves. This might even someday replace governments. For example, Libraland is using EOS DAC technology as well, and it's another example of just nonviolent global consensus. That's something I'm passionate about. That's why I got in this space almost 7 years ago. I want to see humans owning and controlling their own store of value without that, threat of violence that distorts price discovery, distorts everything else. When people feel like they might get thrown in a cage, they don't make the best decisions generally. So I want to see DACs and DAOs have some success cases, and this might be a really amazing success case for a really valuable chain that I'm also passionate about, because you can't really build DACs and DAOs on any other chain really well at this point, and you can on EOS. So then if we do that, we have to make sure EOS is well supported and can communicate with the outside world well. So it is a challenge, but it's going to be a fun one. And I'm really encouraged. Again, Rio was amazing. The number of people that came up and participated, just hearing, hearing you and Rob talking earlier today about like, man, it was so great. And it was, and just seeing all the people that came together. We had a hackathon where people voted on the topics they want to talk about. And the EOS Foundation, EOS governance came up as like a top topic. And we spent, 2 days talking about it. And it was just so encouraging. It's validating that this is important. People want this within the community. They see this is needed. I don't know if you see EOS media much, but there's just so much misinformation out there. Again, and it's not really even the fault of the journalists. They just don't know where to go to. There was a thing a while back that talked about the EOS Nation 1.8 hard fork upgrade. And EOS Nation was just like, oh my gosh. And it's because they put up a website that it just had a countdown. That's all it was. They put up a website, a countdown to say, this is when the hard fork happens. And the journalists were like, oh, this is the EOS Nation, mainnet. And they were just like, no, it's not. So we have to fix that. We have to fix the communication problem. Any other questions? Do I believe it's fixable? I wouldn't try if I didn't think it was fixable. Yeah, I think it's fixable. And there's some interesting with the governance things. There's some interesting, with Dan Larimer's proposal and the EOS New York proposal. So we got some things we can do. But thank you all. I really appreciate the conversation. And I think we're just going to hang out a little bit until our last speaker either is going to be Brock or it's going to be Wax Chain, as far as I know. Anything else we need to know, Zach? Or as far as...
I don't know what's going on. I just work here. Fantastic.
All right, awesome. Thank you so much for listening.
Come on, round of applause.
Thank you, guys.